Hey, hi.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good as well. Let's give a couple minutes before we get started.
Sure. Sounds good. Let's see. And just to clarify, I should be sharing my screen for the
Mhm.
PowerPoint.
We could do either. I can share the screen or you can share. Both should be fine, Mr.
Okay. Yeah. I think if you share it, that would be great.
Yeah,
Thank
sounds good. Let's give one more minute and get started.
you.
I think it's a beautiful day today, again, like in Seattle.
Oh, yeah. I'm not too far from you. I'm in Portland.
Oh, you are? Okay, that's good. Yeah,
Mhm.
Portland usually have like better weather than Seattle. I visited there a couple of times.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty hot right now, but hopefully this is the last of the heat wave.
Exactly. Yeah, I was in India until like yesterday afternoon. As soon as I got here, like what I felt, well, it's pretty hot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm like a little sweating as well because of the weather.
Where in India were you?
So in Hyderabad, so I was there for like a little over a month.
Oh, nice.
So,
Very nice.
so sounds good. Cool. I think we have good number of participants here. Okay, so shall we get started, Mr. Anand?
Sure. That
Okay,
sounds
sounds
good.
good. So let's get started. Hi everyone. First of all, thanks for joining the call. First things first, we I just want to quickly say like whether you're able to hear and see me fine. I know you cannot add like questions in the chat, but like you can do in the Q&A section. Can anyone add a comment whether they can see us fine and hear fine as well? Okay, awesome. Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kavya, and thanks, Venkat, as well. So we'll get started. First of all, I'm pleased to introduce like Nusrat. She's a managing immigration attorney at Boundless. She has like over a decade of experience. She served as like an immigration officer and also served like what I said clients from like global companies. So she has like the dual perspective, both serving clients and also like being an immigration officer. She brings in like that dual perspective, solving like many complex like US immigration processes. Thanks a lot like for your time, Mr. Hat. Why don't I just go ahead and share the screen?
Sure. Thank you so much, Raghu. I'm happy to be here and to present to you. Excuse me. So what we'll be talking about today is, of course, profile building for the EB1A petition. So we'll be talking a little bit about the evidence and what are effective strategies and what is not so effective in terms of profile building. So to understand what is effective and what is not effective, I think it really helps to have a little bit of context. So that's why we're going to talk a little bit today about the background of EB1A. We're going to talk about the law, just the basics, how adjudications happen, what the criteria are that are relevant to your fields, and we'll talk about what final merits is, which is an important part of the adjudication process. So as we're going through the EB1A criteria bit by bit, piece by piece, we'll be just talking about different kinds of evidence and what is good evidence, what is bad or not so helpful, and then what gets into territory that we want to avoid completely, which a colleague of mine had discussed previously in a previous talk, but which I'll touch upon a little bit. And we'll also be looking at the criteria and different opportunities for profile building, also within the context of adjudication trends. Because of the many EB1A petitions we file, we understand what is happening on the ground and we have a good read on it. So going first to what we do. So Boundless is an immigration firm, Boundless Legal Services. We've helped more than 100,000 visa holders. We handle hundreds of EB1A petitions. And we have a high success rate and, as I mentioned, real-time understanding of adjudication trends because of this volume of EB1A petitions that we file. So, we have a US-based legal team, and we do have a section or department that focuses on extraordinary ability. So that's I-140s for EB1A specifically.
Awesome. Let me cover like EB1A experts part as well. Just to quickly introduce myself, like I'm Raghu Suram, CEO and founder of like EB1A experts. And the mission of like starting the company was like to help professionals to pursue like the EB1A green card pathway. I got like EB1A green card and I have like all the nitty-gritty processes and started the company ability to scale to this extent. We have been serving like number of clients over the last 2 years. EB1A has been like our sole focus and expertise like for the last 2 years. We recently got into O1, but still like EB1A is still going to be like our major focus now and moving forward as well. We try to provide like the end-to-end support, of course, like working very closely with Boundless attorneys. And we're trusted by both like tech and non-tech professionals. We have been like helping a lot of tech professionals over the last 2 years, but like we got into non-tech professionals as well right now. And I mean, later in the slide, you'll see like until last month, we got around like 185 approvals. I think we are at 199 right now. So we're like one short of like 200. So we'll be there really soon. Thanks. So one quick thing, like anyone has questions, like please add them to Q&A. We'll take like strategic breaks in between and try to like answer those questions. I'll be also like answering the questions if it's more straightforward ones, like over the chat as well. Over to you, Nusrat.
Thank you, Raghu. Great. So, let's start at the beginning. So what is extraordinary under the law? Where this kind of comes from is the regulations and the federal law, which describes the EB1A category as someone who has demonstrated sustained national or international claim, that their achievements have been recognized in the field of expertise. And the evidence for this comes from either a one-time achievement or at least 3 of the 10 criteria. So a one-time achievement that's being described here is something really major. Very few people have that, which is, where the category gets its name of the Einstein visa, something like the Nobel Prize or the Oscars, something like that. So most people qualify under, using these criteria to demonstrate that they meet the standard. So this brings us to how the adjudications happen. So it's a 2-step process. The officer looks first to the criteria. So there are 10 EB1A criteria. Not all of them apply to everyone, but a person must demonstrate that they meet at least 3 of the 10 criteria. And then after they get through the first step of the process and they pass that they meet at least 3 of the 10 criteria, then the officer looks at their application as a whole and looks to decide, does this person show that they're at the top of their field? In the past, it wasn't done this way. It was done criteria by criteria, just checking off the list, but also looking at the quality of the evidence for each of the criteria. So attorneys were not happy about this. We decided that the adjudicators were adding arbitrary rules where none existed and the law didn't have these qualifications or requirements. So, there was a litigation. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decided in 2010 that, this wasn't fair. They shouldn't be adding things to the criteria. But they said, well, but perhaps they can do a final merits adjudication. So with this mere suggestion, bloomed into what the law is today and how these adjudications happen. So now officers do a 2-step, like I said. First, you look at the criteria, and then you look at final merits. And I'll explain that a little bit more later on. So we can start and go through the criteria that tend to apply to STEM professionals. There are a few other criteria that are more specific to people in creative fields, people in the arts, actors, film, TV professionals, etc. So documentation of the alien's receipt of lesser nationally or internationally recognized prizes or awards for excellence in the field of endeavor. So it has to be an award. Lesser means lesser than, the major award like a Nobel Prize or something like that. So it's less than that. Of course, it doesn't have to be at that level, but it should still be an award that was won through a competitive process. So what adjudicators tend to point out is we look at admission fees. Was the admission fee really the crux of whether a person actually was given this award, won the award or not? Look at how many awardees there are. If there's a huge pool of people that were given this award, then it shows that it's perhaps not very exclusive and it may not be up to EB1A caliber. And then there's also this other part to it, which is it has to be nationally or internationally recognized. So in order to demonstrate that, we can do it a few different ways. We can look to media reports about the award, look at the awards ceremony and who attends and who sponsors it. We can look to professionals or experts in the field. They can attest to how important this award is in the field. But, that could be done in a letter of support. But anything we put in a letter of support really should have some other piece of evidence to support it as well. So, like I said, media, look at past notable winners, corporate sponsors for the awards, etc. So that, and then finally, the award has to be in your field. So if there's a little bit of misalignment between what the award is categorized as, for instance, an award that's more in a business category, but you're not in a business profession, that's not going to work for this criterion. So next, we can go to memberships, and you'll start to see some kind of repeated themes here as to what is good evidence, what is quality evidence, and what is going to help you not just meet this criteria, but help you in the second part of the adjudication process, the final merits adjudication. So memberships have to be in organizations in your field, once again, and it must require outstanding achievements. So, and it has to be, your membership has to be judged by recognized experts, national or international experts in the field. So you can look to organizations that have multiple levels of, membership, so different tiers, or elected positions perhaps. And if you aim for a higher tier, that will be much more effective than an admission tier. You look at who is judging you, of course. You want some evidence of that. Who are the people that are already in the organization, who decides who gets admitted as a member and who doesn't. And, again, media reports always help. You look to whether this organization, this group has regular meetings or events or activities that they engage in. Do they hold an advisory role for a professional or governmental organization? Do they produce white papers that are influential? These kinds of things make it just better and better quality. Now, it's not necessary to have all of those, but if you can have some of that, it helps. An absolute must is that it has to be based on your excellence in your field. Negative factors, again, if payment or experience alone is how you get into the group, it's not going to count. They want to see that the bylaws show that your achievement is the reason for membership. If there are a number of alternative requirements, one being experience, one being achievement, either one works, that's not going to work for this particular criterion. So you have to look at these kinds of details when evaluating whether this group is the right group to join for your profile. And then next, we're going to look to published material about you. So not to be confused with another publications criterion, but this one is news articles, journal articles written about you. So what we're seeing a lot of these days is, a question as to whether the article was written as paid PR or is it something that was, written as part of an editorial process of some publication. So, in some instances, it can be a little bit of a gray area or a fine line. Traditionally, people in creative fields have PR push stories about them in hopes of generating interest in them or in their work, like actors, for instance, artists, musicians. It's quite common. It's newer to STEM professionals, but the line is, was this article written, was this piece written solely because the person writing it was paid a fee, once again, or was it written, was perhaps it brought to the was it brought to the attention of a writer or an editor, and then they selectively decided that they wanted to publish this because it was of interest to their audience or in line with their paper or publication's objectives. So look at the editorial process, look at the reasons and the way in which a publication was published or will be published for you. Okay, so next.
Assuming one quick question
Sure.
here, Nusrat. I'm assuming what's the field is really important here as well. The question is there are a lot of media out there which encompass all the tech fields. Is it advisable to go for a bigger what's a well-recognized one, which probably encompass more fields in the technology domain? Or would it be advisable to go for more niche media? Probably it does not have a great recognition, but it's like more niche and very targeted to your field. Which one do you do? What are the pros and cons? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And in a very lawyerly way, I will say it depends. So both can be very good. So you'll notice that if we go back to the language about the publications, is that professional or major trade or other major media. So you can look at it as three steps. So the first step is professional. You don't have to demonstrate circulation statistics for a professional journal. And that is probably what you're describing as the most niche of them. So that makes it a little easier to qualify. But if it's well known in the profession, there's no reason that shouldn't count as much as one of the other publications. Now, of course, if you have a publication on the other end of the spectrum in the New York Times, a piece written about you, that's going to hold much more sway than, just a professional journal that's more niche. So you can show a combination of all three. Major trade is somewhere in between. So it is something within your field. It encompasses more professions within the broader field. It could be a tech publication, but you have to show the circulation statistics. And it's a little bit gray, but the circulation statistics should somewhat match up with other similar publications that are well known. So all of them can work.
Makes sense. Yeah, thanks, Nusrat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go to the next one.
Yeah, so judging. So this does tend to be an easier one to meet. But because it's a little easier to meet, it tends not to have as big an impact on the second part of the adjudication process. But we have the language here, evidence of your participation in judging either individually or on a panel, the work of others in the same or allied field. So one important point to note here is, you know, look to who you're judging. So it should be peers in your field. It shouldn't be students, for instance. It shouldn't be newcomers. So, a hackathon for students isn't going to be effective here. But, we found that paper reviews, excuse me, they tend to be generally, they work for this criterion. But as always, with all of the evidence that we're talking about in profile building, the higher quality the evidence, all put together helps you in step two. So yeah, a sign of whether a judging event is high quality or not, you can look to whether there's a prize or award, who else is involved in the competition, who are the fellow judges, is it a selective process to be chosen as a judge? Again, award ceremony if it's that type of judging, but a peer review of a paper, that does count as judging.
Makes sense. One common question, what I'm seeing like across like all the criteria here is like how many judging opportunities or like how many awards or how many memberships like do they need to have in order to qualify for that specific criterion?
Yeah, so some of the language here is interesting because some is said in the plural and some is singular. But generally speaking, we like to see at least two pieces of evidence for each criterion that we're going to argue. More can be better, but more quality is really important. So let's say at least two, and quality evidence is always best.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, I mean it's like what is it? The petition is pretty long, right? Like it's somewhere like between 500 pages to like 1,000 pages.
Mhm.
I don't know like how much time like USAS officers do spend on like reviewing everything. So it's always good to go with the quality rather than just doing many different like not so quality evidences for each.
Absolutely. Yeah, things can get lost in the petition. It's a really important practical point. And they do have limited time. The strong, they have quotas that they have to meet, adjudication, timeframes that they have to meet for their performance. So they're not going to be happy if there's a lot of information that doesn't look relevant, and things can just get lost too. So we may lose something that's really great about your profile if you put in just absolutely anything that might qualify.
Awesome. Makes sense.
Yes.
Let's go to the next one.
So speaking of quality, original contributions, this is a big one. So we have found in adjudication trends that this tends to have a very strong impact on whether you get an approval or not. But it is really, of course, tough to show, especially for professionals in STEM fields. Reason being, it's not enough to show that you're doing an excellent job at what you do. It has to show impact beyond your employer, and that can be difficult sometimes. And it's good to think out of the box here. So, do you have evidence beyond what you typically would use for your job performance to show that First of all, that you can be attributed as the author or creator or innovator behind a particular invention, technology, whatever. And then also, how is it recognized? What is the impact in the field? It's a little bit easier for an academic because you can show a citation record, you can show that you've gotten grants. So in this field, it's very much tailored to the individual. And if you can demonstrate, if there's an open source contribution, that can be helpful because that's a little bit more measurable. Or if there's a way to demonstrate that it was a first and others later adopted this technology, and it can be reasonable to presume that it came from this because that's the nature of the field. That's how technologies are developed. So these kinds of things, it's a very fine point. Letters of recommendation are really important here, having good, detailed, specific letters. And that's usually how we demonstrate it. But we're also seeing as an adjudication trend that officers really want to see that whatever we're saying is true in a letter, the letter writer is saying is true, is supported and corroborated by other objective evidence as well.
Awesome. So one quick question here, like original contribution, as you were saying, right? Like when you're in a technology field, patents and citations are like really tough to get any of them. How do we show like our current work? Like how do we show like the work which is done like at the company level? And most times, we can take any examples. Most times it's really, even though like the impact is like outside the organizations, it's really tough to tell that story well. Are there any general like pointers like which we can look at in order to actually tell that story better?
Yeah, no, that's a $1 million question. It's definitely a challenge, and you are the best. For each individual applying, you're the best source of information on what you do in your field. So it's a conversation that you should have with your attorney. Um, Ways I have seen it done is, if a person has published white papers, or we can point to that, that helps to corroborate certain claims in a particular letter of recommendation. It's possible to use an expert letter in these situations. So, what we call sometimes a professor letter. So someone who can analyze what we are describing as your original contributions and give their opinion on what they think the impact on your field was. And there are these academics and professionals who write these letters. They look at your entire petition and they produce this piece of evidence.
That makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. So next we have scholarly articles. This is a little bit of a hot topic. So it was lower. It's not perhaps the highest RFE point, but it's growing, unfortunately, in terms of being challenged. So, there are a few elements to this. So it has to be evidence of the alien's authorship of scholarly articles in the field, in professional or major trade or other major media. So the first element is it scholarly? So you look to, whether there are a lot of footnotes, what was the research process, what was the peer review process, things like that. It doesn't have to necessarily be in an academic journal, as it says. It could be in a professional, major trade, or major media, but it has to be for learned professionals in your field. So the language should reflect that it's coming from that perspective, and that's who the intended audience is. So, elements to look to as to whether this journal article is going to be good enough to and should be included in your petition is, look at the publications process. If we're calling something scholarly, if we're calling something peer reviewed, it shouldn't be a super fast publication process because the peer review process can take time. It can take weeks to months even. So that's an important element. But it doesn't have to be, like I said, in a scholarly publication. Could be a professional publication, like you mentioned earlier, Raghu, the niche kind of publications. It can be something very specific to your field. It could be something in a TechCrunch or something similar like that, a major trade, how I would classify that. So again, thinking outside the box, thinking about what is normal for your profession. What would you normally do to publish, an article? Other things that we have seen come up in RFEs is adjudicators wanting to see that you really authored the article, because that's an element of this too. So they want to see that it wasn't just written by AI, because that doesn't count. And that does get into the territory of misrepresentation. So we just have to be really transparent about, how was this written? What was the process? So one thing that is a common misunderstanding is that sometimes scholarly articles, people don't see this as including conference presentations, but conference presentations can count in this publications, what we call criterion, the scholarly article publication. If you're speaking at a conference for your profession, niche field, then, as long as it's kind of for learned professionals in your field, speaking is a publication in the law. So we usually count it under this criterion, or there's a catch-all criterion that's called comparable evidence, and that's where we put it. And so this next slide kind of gets into that, where we're talking about artistic exhibitions and showcases. This one doesn't exactly fit into most STEM professional fields because you have that qualifier, artistic. And so, if you have an exhibition, what you think is an exhibition or showcase, it's probably not going to count here. There's some few instances where it might, maybe there's a cross section there, but usually it doesn't mean just because you're not getting this additional criterion, it doesn't make your case weaker. It just means that you have more evidence in another criterion. And as I mentioned, the stronger your evidence for any particular criterion, it's all taken together in this two-step adjudication process. So it still helps, and it's as valuable grouped together with another criterion or on its own. It doesn't make it better just because you're adding one more. Okay, and then another very important criterion is the leading or critical role. So the language is evidence that the alien has performed in a leading or critical role for organizations or establishments that have a distinguished reputation. So it does tend to have a disproportionate impact on whether a petition is approved or not. And this one, thankfully, tends to be a little bit more accessible to people, to STEM professionals. So letters of recommendation, again, super important here. But as I mentioned, the adjudication trend is that we want to see corroborating evidence. So some other documentation that what you did the thing that you're saying you did, and that thing is very important to the company or the organization. And, news articles that don't mention you by name that maybe we can't use in the other criterion about publications about you, they can be used here as long as we tie it into your work through the letters. So, if an article was written very specifically about something you worked on and you were a primary actor in developing, then we can certainly use it here. Okay, and then high pay. This one's a little bit more straightforward. So if it's very high pay, even better. But some people are under a misimpression and they think it has to be super high to count, and it doesn't have to be super high, because it's not about measuring your compensation compared to other extraordinary ability persons in your field. It's about measuring your compensation against others in your field at large. And we can also use your total compensation. So that includes RSUs, other kinds of variable pay. It has to be something you've already gotten in terms of variable pay. But future pay, if you have a contract or an offer letter for future pay, and that includes something like RSUs, which are, a little bit more, I won't say guaranteed, but, more likely to happen rather than like a performance-based bonus, then we can certainly use it and we can make that argument.
Got it. One of the common questions what I get, like in the high pay criterion, Nusrat, is how do you even determine, like, what are the sources, like, what are the different places you can look and see, like, whether you do qualify for high pay, or is there any of rule of thumb, like, is it 90%, 90 percentile, 95 or 100, whatever the percentile, like, we need to look at in order to qualify for high pay?
Yeah, that's a great question. So going back to the question of what is extraordinary. So I always kind of go back to that, which is, the Nebraska Service Center has said you don't have to be the top 1%. They look to more the top 20%. So taking that as a rough guide, if we can show that you're in the top 20%, that's good enough, in my opinion, and that tends to work. So we look at the BLS data, figures published by the Department of Labor. Those tend to have a really strong kind of authority in determining whether someone meets this criteria, because it's the government's own numbers. So you can look up by profession, total compensation, and you can see the national numbers, and we can use the national numbers, and we can also use numbers for your state. We can also use, a lot of people might be familiar with the wage levels, because H-1B, you use wage levels, perm, you use these wage levels. It's an important part of determining to qualifying for those particular categories. But we can use that too. So we'll use whatever arguments fits your facts. That's our job, as lawyers, and we can often make it work. If we think that it's not high enough, that it's not going to work, then of course we exclude it. We don't want to muddy the field, as we were saying. We don't want to throw in everything that has a possibility of being accepted, but strong enough arguments will go with it.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Yeah, so
Trends. Anything about the criteria, or should we go to the next slide?
no more, other than there is an additional one called comparable evidence that we don't have a slide for here, but it's a little bit of a catch-all. It's really, if you have something that you think really demonstrates how great you are in your field, but you don't think it fits into the other categories, we can include it in what's called comparable evidence. We have to just demonstrate that it doesn't apply to any of the others, and we can work that into your application.
Makes sense. There are like a lot of questions which are waiting. Do you think whether should we take questions, Nusrat, or go to the
Sure,
next
yeah, because we've already kind of gone through the RFE trends. Yeah, let's get to the questions.
Cool. Sounds good. Let me go to the questions. We have around 35, 36 questions coming in. A quick, what is it? There's a question about like RFE trends. I know that this is a slide which is going to talk about, but like the question is, there have been like increased scrutiny on the adjudication over the last like 5 to 6 months. The question is like, is it true? If yes, what is the approval rates like you've been seeing like in Boundless or like EB1A experts side?
Sure. So, yeah, the rate of RFEs has increased over the last 5 or 6 months. So the way it works is that, yes, of course, under this administration, we expected more RFEs. This was true the first time around, not just for EB1A, but for everything, higher rates of RFEs. In fact, there are certain non-immigrant visa categories that were hit really hard. And, the trends that we're seeing is what you see here. But it's also because, this category has opened up to a lot of people, because the government wanted it to be opened up to people. They wanted more STEM professionals to apply. They wanted entrepreneurs to apply more often. So, past administrations issued executive orders, issued policy memoranda or announcements saying, please apply. This is how we're going to apply this to you. We're going to be generous. We want you to apply because it's in our national interest. Now, administration's changed, so we're seeing a little bit of pullback, and also a lot more people have applied, of course. So, there's naturally going to be a little pullback there too. So, our RFE rate is a little bit higher than it was in the past, but our approval rate is still above 80%. We are adjusting our strategy, as we always do, based on these adjudication trends. And, that's why part of this talk today and our talk before was to address these issues, just to talk about what works, what's helpful, how to ensure that what you're putting together is helpful to your petition, your chances of winning.
Exactly. That's right. And I want to add a couple of points there as well, as you mentioned, like in the last administration. So 3 years or 3.5 years, like when I started, there's not like much information about like EB1A, but later on, I've seen USCIS clarified more things about EB1A. If I remember right, it was like a year or a year and a half ago. They did mention like few pointers about like what type of evidence would they accept like for each criterion. One of the examples what you were talking about, like the high salary earlier, like future salary can also be included. Like you have an offer letter, you can usually can use that. That's one thing. I've seen like many like posts on LinkedIn on USCIS. There's a page where like was they promoted definitely 1A, EB1A, and they're promoting like many people to apply as well. Those are the things which I've been saying as well. And yeah, I can like add things a little bit like more on the RFE as well. We try to like at EB1 expert side, like we try to just go through like the RFEs as like the bonus attorneys and try to like pull in more information. What are the extra information we can add to substantiate like the evidences is something which we're trying to do. Of course, like working with the clients and working with the attorneys like in the process as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one other question what's been getting here is, so USCIS policy says like sustain the claim in the field of endeavor. So the question is like, do we need to show sustained a claim like across like each of the criteria, or is it like just to show sustained a claim in the final merits would be enough?
Yeah, great question. So yes, sustained a claim is more relevant to the final merits determination. Now, it gets a little bit muddy because, how do you get to final merits without looking at the evidence that was already submitted under each criterion? So, it's not that you have to meet it for every single one. Under Kazarian, it's the plain language of the criteria and then final merits. So they look back at the evidence that you submitted, but you don't have to meet it for every single one. If you show a breadth of time covered in your accomplishments, that helps. But that includes original contributions and your critical or leading roles as well. So older projects that you worked on, perhaps, those things help. They want to see that it's not brand new, but it's sustained and it's, relevant today. So oftentimes you'll get an example from USCIS of a person who was a star athlete 15 years ago, but they're not necessarily going to be a star athlete today. So it's kind of the opposite, where they were kind of emphasizing recency. So there's a balance in between there.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So thanks for that. I know there. I'm seeing like a few more questions on like the number of evidences. It was clarified earlier, where like we say at least like it's plural, so try to have like two or more, and having more quality evidence is better than the quantity of evidences. There are a few other questions about like where the location of these organizations who issue these evidences and stuff. Are they need to be in US, across the world? Like, do you have like an NGO preference? Is some other question you're getting? I mean, is there any percentage allocation between like US versus like across the world?
Percentage, it can't be that precise, but I'll say this, that, getting back to the quality issue and, the idea of reputation. So if you have a group that you're joining that is, I mean, most of these things should be national in nature, if not international, right? So in some cases, you can use regional things if it's nationally or internationally recognized. Like a regional award can count if it's nationally or internationally recognized. So for instance, if it's something in New York, but New York is the base of the finance sector. So if it's a finance related award in New York, it holds great sway internationally. So that's an example. But for most of these things like conferences, memberships, things like that, if it's going to be an unknown location where it's based, it's not going to help and it will be looked at perhaps suspiciously. So, if it's a something in the Bay Area, like a conference in the Bay Area, naturally that's going to be much more influential than something in another country that is not known in this field. So, look at all of these elements. And if there's a country that is looked upon, in terms of higher rates of fraud for producing documents or things like that, that's important to look to as well. And unfortunately, there's a little bit of bias there, but if you can demonstrate through measurable means that it's reliable, that it's real, that it's been around a long time, it's well respected through all these different ways, media articles, professional testimonials, things like that. All of those things help.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, the recognition of like the organizations is really important as well. So there are a few other questions around like original contributions and letters of recommendations. But the questions are like, let's say they're like pending patents or like citations, like what is the number of citations they need to use to qualify for the original contribution. Just adding on to that, like regarding the letters of recommendations, is like who these people have to be. Do you have to be working with them, or like can it be like from someone like who you have never worked, or they're getting like the independent, like what is it, independent letters, like what the work what you have done.
Yeah, great question. So, starting with the question about original contributions and patents. So, generally speaking, patents should be widely used to demonstrate original contribution, but it's not totally black and white. There is some room there if it's, it can be demonstrated to be at least original and useful. If there's a patent, it's definitely not going to be as strong if it's not widely used, if it's something new, because it's just not going to show the impact element of original contributions. We can still include it, and we do still include it, and I think that it has an enhancing impact on the final merits adjudication. because it's certainly not easy to get a patent. So it does help in that regard. Now, in terms of citations, there's no magic number, but citations are tough because in order to use a citation as original contribution, you should have a high citation count. Some of that is comparative, but I would say at least 100 would work in that way. So, you don't, because you cannot argue that a scholarly article has a huge impact on the field if it's not been cited very much. So, but it can be used in other ways. Like I said, plain language of the publications criterion can be met even if you don't have high citation count. It's not going to help you hugely in the final merits determination, but it's still useful for meeting the criteria and building up your evidence in your profile. And then in terms of expert letters, so you can know this individual in a number of different ways. You can know them professionally, perhaps someone that you've met at conferences, someone that worked in parallel with you but did not directly with you, or someone who worked on the customer side or vendor side, but that you didn't work directly with. All of these individuals can count. A mentor can count, a professor can count, but we try to not emphasize a professor-student relationship because it kind of brings the adjudicator back to you being perhaps new in your field and not showing sustained acclaim, not showing that you're at the top of the field. But anyone that you can demonstrate you have some kind of professional relationship with. Now, it can be that you've become friends with this person, but we don't want to say, so-and-so is my friend, he's great, he's also a really great engineer. That's not going to really help, right? So we want to make sure that there's some professional way that you've come together and come to know this person.
Of course, of course. Yeah, in the letters, like what is we need to keep it professional and like what is how things are connected and need to clearly emphasize like how the specific work, depending on the type of letter, if it's a critical letter, it has to be talking about like the work that's being done. Original contribution, definitely it has to be talking about like the innovation, innovations, and originality of the work as well. That's right. Thanks for that. The other major question what I see is like about AI. I mean, in the last like year and a half, like there's so much AI being used across, and the use of AI is like growing every day. So in the whole process, like how much can we use AI, and like in what aspect like can we use AI?
Yeah, I mean, of course, AI is a very useful tool in some contexts, but I mentioned where it was relevant in terms of publications. That's definitely one aspect where it should not be used except for in very specific ways. So when we go to the scholarly articles criterion, part of the element is that you have authored an article. Now, we can make a legal argument that this is a brand new frontier, that prompting AI to write an article should be considered authoring an article. But I think that's going to be a stretch to make, and you don't necessarily want to get into that, into that area when trying to win your EB-1A petition. So, in terms of, a tool to help you write letters of recommendation or things like that, as long as, it has the human element and it's individualized, terms aren't and phrases aren't repeated, things like that. And then ethically, it has to have, if something is being signed, by an individual, they have to have had eyes on it, reviewed it, understood it, and agreed to it. And that goes for everything. So letters of recommendation, your petition, the brief that we submit, anything that has a signature on it that someone is attesting to, needs to ethically have that human involvement.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, like in the organizations as well, right now, like what's this AI, definitely there needs to be human oversight, needs to be checked, that only the thought process is there. And I think like the similar thought process need to be applied like for the EB1A. It could be about petition, it could be any criteria, it could be any content that's being written overall process. Just make sure like use it for research purposes, of course, like the content structuring purposes, but not solely as like the primary and you as a secondary.
Exactly.
Makes sense. There are a few questions on like what's it, the evidence is way to get. There are like a lot of organizations, let's say like Amazon, that could be Amazon, Netflix, like Meta, etc. So what they do is like they have like awards like within the company, or they have like technical logs like within the company as well. So would you suggest like having like articles or awards or memberships judging like within the company versus like outside?
Well, both are useful, but within the company can be very useful, especially when you're talking about that type of company that has this reputation and is so huge.
Mhm.
So we can use this information in multiple different ways. So something that you use for one criterion, you can also use for other criteria too. So awards, for example, an in-company award, it usually doesn't qualify for that awards criterion, but it can if it's recognized as a mark of excellence in the field at large. So if you got an award within that company, this prestigious company, and it's recognized by your peers, then we could make a good argument that it should qualify as an award under the awards criterion. And even setting that aside, it certainly should qualify for the critical or leading role criterion. And it may also help with an original contributions criterion argument.
Awesome. Sounds good. So on that. A few questions came up about like the recording and sharing the deck. What are you gonna do is like within a week's time, like we'll upload this on the YouTube channel. I'm gonna share like our YouTube channel link in a bit. Do you want to go through the rest of the deck and then we'll come back to a few more questions that they have like on RFA trends?
Sure, yeah. So we were last at the RFE trends slide. So you can see awards is at the top of the list, unfortunately. So that's why we're being very responsive to these adjudication trends, and we understand what is effective and what is not, and that's what we covered earlier. In terms of what kinds of awards work or not. One of the most common issues with these awards is the national or international recognition aspect, and then also, the number of awardees. So be sure to look to those elements. As I mentioned, original contributions can be tougher in the field just because of the nature of the field. So we have to think outside the box. Like we just talked about, those company awards that can really help in this if it's recognized in the field at large. And in terms of overall RFE rate, um, it's the at our last check, it was about 40%, which is high, but not unexpected, based on this administration, adjudication trends, but especially this administration. But we still have that 80+% approval rate. That's the last number I have, um, as you can see in this next slide. And approvals can be had after an RFE or even what's called a notice of intent to deny, which is another response that you can get to a petition. So you can get an approval, an RFE, or a NOID. You could respond to an RFE or a NOID and still get an approval.
Listen, yeah, just want to quickly clarify that, like, what's this is EB1A experts number of approvals. I think like Boundless has, I mean, more than 1,000 approvals across like all the attorneys they work for.
Yes.
So they have like, I mean, probably almost a decade of experience like working on the EB1A petitions.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So let's see. And then, yeah, that's
Okay.
really where we are now.
Yes.
Um,
We'll have a couple of more questions and stuff, and then we'll close it out. Quick things like if you have, I know, like whatever, like Nusrat and I have been talking about, like in the whole thing, have been more in generic in process. But like if you have any more custom questions about your profile, where you want to dive deep, you could set up a call. Like what is that? I shared the contact us of EB1 experts in the chat. I'll also share like contact us of like Boundless as well. So you can set up a call just to try to understand like more about your profile, the work, what you've been done. Would you qualify right away? If not, like what is it? What else can be done in order to actually improve your profile so that you're EB1A ready as well? And now I think what is it? Okay, so the question what's coming up is, let's say like you go through the whole process, and there could be an RFE, there could be a denial in the process as well. Would that affect their immigration prospects if there is any denial, like an EB1A?
no, it does not impact any other part of your, immigration applications, your immigration profile. The only way there would be an impact is if there was an issue of misrepresentation or fraud, which of course is very extreme. And, we're not engaging in anything like that. I mentioned those things that can be kind of, questionable. that you want to steer away from. But transparency is the name of the game, just to be very clear about how you achieved or obtained any particular accolade. And in terms of negative impact, each petition has to be evaluated on its own merits, brand new. So even if you were to withdraw your I-140, you can refile it. You can work on it a little bit and refile it again. Of course, you have to pay the USCIS fees again, so that is a loss there. But with this great reward potential at the end of getting this potentially current, or most people have a prior I-140 that has been sitting and waiting for a very long time. And EB1A presents this opportunity for, getting closer, if not actually being able to apply for that green card and getting the actual green card at the end of the process, untethered to an employer. So yeah, short answer, no, it doesn't affect your other immigration petitions. If you're, excuse me, if you're on H-1B and you're past your cap period, your maximum period for H-1B, and you're relying on your old I-140s to keep getting those extensions, very common scenario. If you then get your I-140 approved, you would talk to your company attorney during the time when the time comes up for your next extension and let them know that you have this additional approved I-140, because you may be required to demonstrate that you're pursuing the green card if it's current under the visa bulletin, which I'm sure no one is going to sit on an approved I-140 that's current in the visa bulletin. I'm sure you'll go for that green card application.
Exactly. No, I can definitely empathize like with the comment what you made as well. So my priority date was like December 2020, and I've realized I would never get a green card. Like compared to when I look at the backlog for India, it was at the time I think it was 2020 2012 for EB2. I've realized like hey, it would be tough, so I had to make like was a work towards like EB1A, and at the time I didn't know like the chance of approval rate is like pretty high. I was thinking like what it would be around like 10% or 15% approval rate, but I kept going and got the EB1A. That's something which I can do it. There's one question which I've been commonly getting. I don't know why. So the question is, again, this probably is like the fourth time I've heard like in the last like week to 10 days. Can you apply like EB1A, EB1B, and like EB1C or like any other like EB applications in parallel? And can you apply the same application multiple times? Let's say like what say you want to apply EB1A like through your employer and also like with an external attorney to have like the more excellent chances. Like what is the limitations in that whole process and stuff?
That's very interesting. You can certainly apply for multiple petitions and applications in parallel. There's no issue there in terms of having multiple EB1A petitions at a time. I believe that's petitioner dependent. So if your employer wishes to pursue an EB1A petition and you intend to also pursue it on your own, um, I've not seen that in the real world, but I suppose that may be technically possible. It does create some questions though, because you would want to reconcile the information amongst the applications. And because the criteria are the same, they're not petitioner dependent. It's essentially submitting the same application over again. And if it even goes to two different adjudicators, which it may not, I would imagine they would be bundled together and compared, and then the same adjudication, because the agency has an interest in being consistent as much as possible. There are a lot of trainings on this, to try to create consistency and quality assurance between these petitions. So I imagine that's what would happen, but that would be an unusual scenario.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was really surprised like when I heard the question for the first time as well. But it's increasingly common. It's increasingly coming up. So probably I have to see like if there is any change or like something going on in that aspect. I think we covered most of the questions. There are like a few questions which actually the one more question which came up. It looks interesting. When an employer applies like for EB1, let's say they go through an employer like company attorney,
Mhm.
the question is like, can if you move to a new company, do you still hold the I-140? Because I think the question which is coming up is like because in EB2, when you move to a new employer, you still have to go back and apply for an I-140 again, even though you have the priority date. How about like that in EB1A or EB1B per se?
So EB1A specifically, if the petition is approved, now there are some practical implications of an employer perhaps trying to revoke or withdraw a petition, but assuming you're doing premium processing, it gets approved. It's your petition. The requirement is not that you work for that particular employer, but the requirement is that it's forward-looking and that you intend to work in your field of expertise. So that petition does stay with you and you're able to, once it's current, apply. The practical issues are, is this employer going to try to withdraw the petition at some point? And that's a little bit more of a fine point that I don't want to advise anyone on during the call because it's more of an individualized consultation kind of a question. But yes, EB1A, generally speaking, is not employer tied. It's field expertise qualifications tied.
Definitely, Nusrat. Like on that note, I would just like to put like this quick disclaimer once again. Like a lot of the information which you shared like during this webinar is more like generic, like in purpose, but like of course, like it's individualized, like type of evidence, type of profile, the work, everything which is done, kind of determines like a lot of the what is the structure and strategy which should be put for EB1A. So if you have more questions on that, like please use the link which is shared in the chat to set up a call to try to understand like more details about the same. I think we pretty much covered everything here. Nusrat, would you want to add like any closing comments?
No, but just mirroring what you're saying, Raghu, is that this is not intended as legal advice. This is general information. But understanding the law, understanding the context of EB1A, I hope that that helps you in understanding what you can do to, enhance your likelihood of getting an approved EB1A petition.
Awesome. Again, thanks again, Nusrat, for taking time and answering all the questions from the audience. Again, just want to clarify once again. So probably like within a week's time, we'll put up like the recording of this one on our YouTube channel. And if you have like any questions, just feel free to set up a call using the link in the chat. We'll probably like provide that a little bit like more information about the questions what you have. Thanks again. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Raghu. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.